Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to West Devon Development Management Committee. We'll make a start. It's been 10 o'clock, so apologies for absence, please.
We've got apologies from Councillor Mann, and Councillor Vachon is substituting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests that they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yes, I'm declaring an interest in Nightingale Cottage on the grounds that I'm the one who's brought it into committee with a fair number of reasons, so I'm frightened of predetermination in this case.
Okay, you will be speaking to it.
Yes.
Thank you. Items requiring... Oh, sorry, Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the item B, Pitscombe Lamerton, is in my ward, and I asked this to be called in. I will be speaking briefly when that item comes up. I would still intend to listen to the arguments and make an appropriate decision, but if it was preferred by the Chair and or the legal officer, I'd be happy to abstain if that was considered to be the appropriate action.
Thank you very much. Any introductions? Okay, before we go any further, we'll just go round the room. There's a fair number of people watching what we're up to, so we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves and the wards we represent, starting with Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Jory, I'm the ward member for Milton Ford Ward.
Tony Leach, Oakhampton North.
Jeff Moody, Tavistock North Ward. Steve Guthrie, Drew Stainton Ward.
Councillor Sam Wakeham, Hatherley Ward.
Councillor Caroline Mott, Bridistow Ward.
Alistair Cunningham, Buckland-Monacorum Ward.
Councillor Paul Vachon, Oakhampton South Ward, substituting for Councillor Mann.
I'm Lauren Hutton, I'm Senior Planning Officer.
Jacqueline Houselander, Lead Planning Officer for this committee, Head of Development Management for West Devon.
Rich Edel, West Devon Development Management Committee Chairman and Ward Member for Buckland-Monacorum.
Terry Southcott, Ward Member for Bridistow Ward and Vice Chair of this committee.
Graham Lawrence, Senior Planning Officer, brackets, Heritage.
Catherine Hall, West Devon Borough Council Democratic Services Officer.
And we have David Fairburn online.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Fairburn. I'm Head of Legal Services and the Legal Advisor to the committee this morning.
Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is items requiring urgent attention. None have been brought to my attention, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting held on the 2nd of July. Can I take those as an accurate record? Thank you. We've now got a brief statement from David Fairburn. Is there?
Apologies, Chairman, you take me slightly by surprise. Just to say that in determining the applications this morning, for those members of the public who are not necessarily familiar with the process that the committee will follow, the committee is required to have regard to the development plan and any material considerations, and to determine the planning applications before them, having regard to, in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations suggest otherwise. A material consideration being something that concerns the use and development of land. Thank you, Chair. I think that's probably where I'll leave it. Shorter than usual. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So on to the planning applications in front of us today, and the first one is 082124 Nightingale Cottage, Germans Week, Be Worthy, householder application for the erection of an extension. I'll now turn to the Planning Officer for her brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. That's the first hurdle out the way, is getting the slideshow up. So I have an update for the applications for councillors. Before we start, we've had an additional 2 letters of representation. Is that better? We'll try.
Can you hear everyone?
Can you hear? Is that better? Excellent. Okay. So we have had an additional 2 letters of representation. The first one being from Germans Week Church Council, saying that they do not feel that there is a detrimental impact to the setting of the church, and they have no objection to the application. The second of which is a letter with suggestions for compromise and general suggestions about the application, which have all been covered by myself in the report. I'm not going to read this letter out, and I would like to just remind councillors that although there may be opportunity for compromise down the line, that today we are here to determine the application that is in front of us. So this is the application site. We are on the southern side of Germans Week. The property lies within Germans Week Conservation Area and is adjacent to the Grade 2-star listed building and next to a public right-of-way. The property is located via a shared drive and off of the main road. The property is a former barn with existing permission and is being converted into a 2-bedroom dwelling. Just to clarify, the red line of the application, there is a slight awkwardness to this red line as it is on the slide. I just want to point out this circle here. The jagged pokey out little bit is not accurate, and it should just be squared off. So this is an aerial photo. It's quite actually hard here to distinguish the property. It lies here. And above here to the northwest lies the Grade 2-star listed church. I wanted to directly address the conservation area. So here we have a map of the conservation area line. The property is located here, which is inside the conservation area as dictated by the purple. Quite a lot of the boundary of the application site is within the buffer zone. What I wanted to stress here is that the dwelling makes a positive contribution and has been identified through pre-apps previously and in this application as being a non-designated heritage asset, which does sit inside the conservation area. And I'd also like to stress that the MPPF states that the setting of heritage assets is to do with the surrounds and how it is experienced. This extent is not so much fixed and it may change over time. The extension, as we will see in the subsequent slides, is obviously fully attached to a building that has been identified previously as making a positive contribution. I just wanted to put in some historical context. This is the barn as evident on the first edition OS maps from 1880. I've highlighted the barn in yellow just for clarity here. And again, here and again we can see the church, same place up to the northwest. These are the existing elevations. There is a small conservatory on the south elevation, as seen here. The building largely resembles a barn that has been converted. It has hipped roofs and porch area on the west elevation here. There are some notable additions, but generally the dwelling still reads as a barn. These are the proposed elevations of the development. So first we'll have a look starting at the top, which is the east elevation. This is actually the rear of the building. The way it sits right on the border. So the principal elevation, which is the west elevation, sits facing all of the domesticated garden area. Here we can see the two-storey link extension, which is rubble stone with a flat roof clad projecting bay, and the rear of the single-storey extension that's linked. On the west elevation, we have a hip-to-gable conversion with extensive use of roof lights and a relocated porch, which has been relocated here over to here into the single-storey rendered extension. On the north elevation, really you can see the extent of the proposed extension against the scale of the dwelling, which is here. The proposed changes really change the way in which the property is entered. So currently you enter on the west elevation via a small porch extension, and the entrance of the property is going to be changed. So as you enter into the site, you see the north elevation. This is how it presents as you enter the site, and you will enter the building via the extension. And on the south elevation here, you can see this is all extension. All of the measurements are within the report, but just for clarity, the proposed extension is 5.6 metres to 4.8 metres. The height varies in height. At the largest point, 15 metres width and 9 metres in breadth. These are the existing and proposed ground floor plans. I think that this plan really highlights the scale of the proposal in context to the building as it is at the moment. They have relocated the bedrooms downstairs into the host dwelling, and the main living area will be in the extension. This is the existing and proposed first floor extensions. See those side by side. Just for context, I know that a few councillors didn't make it to the site visit. So this is the barn from when I went to site on my site visit. As you can see, it's stone clad, quite traditional looking. Now, I really wanted to address the view. So this was from a photo that I took from my site visit, which was dated no, it's not. Yes, it is. Sorry. Excuse me. So this was dated on the 30th of April when I went for my site visit. So I'd like councillors to bear in mind that this is the middle of spring, just after Easter. Foliage is evident on this photo, but it certainly does not give a clear indication of the views in autumn and winter months, which could be significantly more. And I just wanted to allude to this photo, which was taken from the pre-application documents from a pre-app that was put in 2023. There's no indication on the date that this photo was taken, although given the lack of coverage, I would assume that it was in the winter months. Now, just a little bit more on the history of this site. The applicants have come in for 2 pre-applications. The first one was in 2002, which was a scoping only, which means that there was no site visit. So general advice was given. I've not put any of the general advice in this presentation because it was for a very slightly different scheme with a different design. The pre-application that we have up on screen, which is 003523PR1, is the same design that we have in to determine now for the application. So I thought it was prevalent to talk about the pre-application advice that was given. At the top here, we have direct advice that was given by Graham Lawrence in regards to the heritage side of this application. I am going to read it out, apologies, because I do think that it's prevalent to the application. The design scheme that has been presented is considered to be overtly large and overbearing, out of character with the host dwelling and its setting, and would have a detrimental impact on the setting and the character and appearance of the listed church and the setting within the conservation area, and is therefore considered to cause less than substantial harm. The next paragraph is from the planning officer, which was not myself, that dealt with the pre-application, and this was taken from the conclusion. It says, I reiterate again, there may be limited scope for a much smaller extension to this former barn, but the scale of the proposal would need to be of more sympathetic and good quality traditional design. It is unlikely that anything on the scale that has been proposed will receive officer support, and officers do not consider that the footprint of the current design scheme is subservient, or that the attempted visual separation of the proposed L-shaped extension from the host dwelling has overcome officer concerns. There has also been a pre-application with Historic England in which the local planning authority were not informed of before this application came in. So generally they were supportive of an extension. We do not, although the response is detailed in an annex in the planning statement of the planning application, I do not have any additional documents as to what plans were actually looked at by Historic England, whether they were the same, and it was a private consultation in which there was no communication with the local planning authority. But I did want to highlight just a small paragraph from that response letter. It says that we understand that the local authority has previously provided advice in relation to earlier iterations of the proposal. In terms of policy compliance, design and scale, we note that they have listed the relevant local plan policies. Some of these policies relate to design, heritage and place shaping. We strongly recommend that you consider how your proposals can be aligned to comply with these policies, which is what I have done in this application. I also wanted to directly address the barn guide. So there, just to clarify whether it is or is not applicable in this application. So this is taken from the supplementary planning document, paragraph 1.2. So the barn guide is previous guidance which aids developers looking to adapt and reuse traditional farm buildings which are common in rural areas. The barn guide details how the character and interests of traditional farm buildings can be successfully conserved through the planning process, and those two words are really key here. The barn guide is not just for barn conversions. It safeguards these barns, which are precious buildings, through the whole of the planning process. And I've also got an appeal, which is also for a householder extension, which is from South Hams, in which the inspector acknowledges the barn guide and uses it within his determination. So we come to the policy considerations for this application. I would like to really highlight that, yes, there are heritage concerns on this application, but in actual fact, the mass and the scale of this of this extension does not accord with TTV 29.5, which talks about the appropriateness of extensions and talks about the internal floor space. The original building should not be, there is scope for going over 50%, but only if there is a demonstrable uplift in build quality, the host dwelling is not unduly diminished, and the proposal does not have a negative impact on external amenity space. Again, I have spoken about this in my report, and I have concluded that the first and the second point have not been met, and therefore, in principle, this is not an acceptable application. Of course, there are also additional concerns with the historical context. So the key issues for this application are the sensitive location. We're in a conservation area and the setting of a Grade 2 star listed building. It is an extension to existing barn conversion. We are in a rural location, which is why we apply TTV 29 and the design. And here I have listed the reasons for refusal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Very comprehensive report. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for the planning officer? Also, we have the heritage officer with us, so if there are questions on the heritage aspects, they could be addressed now too. Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just explain the involvement of the LPA in the pre-app advice, please?
Yes, so previously, as I mentioned, there have been two pre-apps, one in 2002 and one in 2003. So 2002 was a scoping only pre-app, which means that there was no officer on site. So we had plans, the officer looked at those plans online, did an online assessment and spoke to the heritage officer as part of that application. Advice was then subsequently given. Then in 2003, there was another pre-app which was on site and from another planning officer, and again, a consultation was sought from our heritage officer. A report was written and then that was given there.
I've got a couple of questions. Has there been a heritage impact assessment? And also, the second point is, has there been a community involvement in the application at all? Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Right. Has there been a heritage impact assessment, and has the community been involved in any discussions?
So there has been a heritage impact assessment, which is one of the documents that we asked for at validation stage for this report. We have reviewed that, and no, there has not been any community involvement in that heritage report or a subsequent one. Graham, would you like to comment on that question?
I would only add that in my comments, which are in the officer report, I do reference the heritage statement having been provided, but I do say that it doesn't adequately consider whether there's harm to the heritage assets as set out as a requirement in the National Planning Policy Framework, nor does it acknowledge the fact that the property must be considered a non-designated heritage asset that makes a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area. I say that in section 6, relevant conservation policies and guidance, there's no reference to either the barn guide, which is part of the adopted supplementary planning document, or the Historic England advice on the setting of heritage assets. So that was my summary of comment on the heritage statement as provided.
Thank you. I was trying to differentiate between a heritage statement and a heritage impact assessment, which aren't the same. So there was a heritage statement, but not an impact assessment.
Chair. Heritage impact assessments tend to be required where significant or major development proposals are happening within the setting of a heritage asset, or that may affect the character and special interest of a heritage asset. So for a development of this scale, a heritage statement is perfectly reasonable. Yeah.
Can I just also add that the Parish Council have commented on the application as well.
Any other questions for the planning officer from the committee at this stage? No. We have 3 registered speakers for this application, and the first is Mr. Pearce. Yeah. Come to the table here, and all will be revealed. Settle in. I'm sure you know, but you have 3 minutes to tell us what you wish to. And if you can press the button on the speaker and pull it towards you so that everyone can hear what you've got to say. In your own time, off you go.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. There's quite a lot to cover in 3 minutes. A lot's been said this morning. I think it's important to note for members that when the officer was asking for delegated refusal, there was only one reason for refusal, and that was the first reason for refusal in your document. The second reason did not form part of that delegated refusal. Having read the report, there are 2 main areas of concern: the perceived impact on the conservation area and the setting of the church, and the impact of the proposed extension on the host building. Historic England's opinion was sought at Nicky Glanville's request during the pre-app stage, and therefore to dismiss the comments of Historic England are somewhat disingenuous. The advice which is in the heritage statement is quite clear in terms of the impact on the setting of the church. Historic England do not believe that there is an impact on the setting of the church nor on the conservation area. In terms of the first reasons for refusal, I'm sure members will agree with Historic England's comments that the proposal will not affect the setting of the church or the conservation area. There's a significant distance between the church and the extension. The extension lies outside the conservation area and is not visible from public vantage points, which is an important and key consideration in terms of the assessment. Accordingly, the proposal is acceptable in terms of the heritage assets. The report goes on to state that the dwelling is a non-designated heritage asset. However, we would suggest that it should not be treated as such. The building has not been identified as a non-designated heritage asset through the planning process, neither is it on a list of such assets that is held by the LPA, and nor does it appear on the historic building or historic environment register. There is nothing of substance to support the argument that the building should be treated as such. There are 2 appeal decisions which would support this view. The building has been occupied for the past 20 years and is not a barn, it is a dwelling. The second reason for refusal relates to design and size of the extension. The existing dwelling is cramped and the interior circulation space is extremely limited. The proposed extension will address those matters and make the best use of the site and the topography. It is noted that Jonathan Rind Architects are a reputable conservation architectural practice with more than 30 years' experience in the southwest, and they have designed the extension. The new proposals will respect the existing structure and reflect the contemporary design, avoiding recreation or limitations of historic styles. The scale, form and proportions and materials are intended to be harmonious with the old and new. Although some may consider the extension bold, it remains sympathetic and subservient to the original building. Additionally, the proposals are visually and distinctively reversible. Accordingly, members are urged to grant planning permission for the extension, which will not adversely impact the character and appearance of the conservation area, setting of the church or the host dwelling. Thank you for your time.
Yourself a minute spare. Thank you. Members of the committee. Just stay put for a minute. Members of the committee, have you got any questions for Mr. Pearce? Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Pearce. Just 2 questions. The policy Dev 23 requires a development to conserve and enhance the conservation area. What mitigating measures would you consider would adhere to the conservation and enhancement of the area, and also which would overcome the increase in floor space by 300%?
that's an interesting. I don't know if we've got the plans. If it's available to have a look at the plans. I mean, the key point here, Councillor Moody, is the site lies outside the conservation area. It's a simple design. It's sympathetic in terms of it reflects the existing building. There'll be slate on the roof. It is proposed to have render, which is not an unusual material in or outside or adjacent to conservation areas. And I'm sure, I don't know if you went on the site visit, but you will have seen, if you did, or if you know Germans Week, that there are plenty of rendered structures. In terms of the increase in size, I think it's important to note members were given the opportunity to go inside the property. I don't know if you can show the floor plans, Lauren.
We were given the opportunity to go.
Yeah, I don't know if you, yeah. I mean, it's a very long building and doesn't flow very well in terms of its internal space, and it's quite cramped. The upstairs rooms are in the roof, and this proposed extension allows for increased and improved circulation and living. It's all about living, and the occupiers' amenities in terms of living in that property.
But what are the mitigating things that will overcome the?
Well, I think that's. I mean, it's a simple design. It does it in our view, and to be honest, in the view of historic England, it doesn't impact on. It's outside the conservation area, so it's a setting of the conservation area. In terms of setting of conservation area, it's got to be visible from a public vantage point, and as far as I'm aware, it's not. So in that respect,
I thought it was in the.
No. The property. This is the key point. Right. The property is that the host dwelling is inside the conservation area. The actual extension is outside the conservation area. I know the officers have made a big play that it's in the buffer zone or in the buffer area or whatever that is. But it's outside. It's outside. Or if you okay, so there may be an extension, a part of it that is attached to the end wall that would be inside, but the majority of that extension is outside the conservation area.
Any other questions from the committee at this stage? Councillor Jury.
Thank you, and thank you for your words and explanation. I note that advice has been provided on, according to the report, 3 separate occasions, and reference has been made to guidelines such as the Barn Guide. Despite that, it seems that the proposal in front of us has incurred comments from the planning officer about its scale, form, design, and materials. Can you tell me whether you considered alternatives to the scale, form, design, and materials, and in particular the roof, because obviously it's also been commented that the change of roof from gable to hipped, I think, is clumsy. Could you tell me whether you consider any alternatives and why, despite the advice, you've gone ahead with the proposal that's in front of us?
Thank you for that. Can I just adjust the point on the barn conversion guide as you've raised it? I'm going to say obviously that there are appeal decisions which dismiss the design guide, the barn conversion design guide, when it comes to properties that have been converted for a significant period of time, such as this one. I've got an appeal decision. I can give you the reference. It will be meaningless to the committee, but there are, and that was actually in West Devon. So, my opinion on the design guide is it doesn't relate to properties that have been converted for at least 20 years. This is a dwelling. It's not a barn. It has all the attributes of a dwelling. In terms of the design iteration, this has been through, I think, 2 to 3 versions, and this is the final version, which is smaller than the originals. There has to be a balance between, to a certain extent, taking the informal advice of officers and actually what the applicants' needs are in terms of extensions, and that's where we've got to in this particular point. We've reached a bit of a buffer, and the only way of really testing those things, councillor Jury, is by the application. In terms of the hip to gable, I'm not convinced that that's clumsy. I don't accept that as a description of how you're going from a hip to a gable is clumsy. There are plenty of hips there are plenty of gables in Germans Week. I don't think it's. I think there are plenty of buildings in rural locations that have gable ends such as is proposed. So I'm not sure I recognise that as a clumsy alteration to the building.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other questions? Councillor Wakeham. Then Councillor Guthrie.
Is there any reason why you've chosen aluminium for the windows instead of having it in keeping in wood? Is there any reason why you've chosen aluminium for the windows and not kept it in keeping using wood?
I think the use of aluminium windows, it's not unusual in, let's put this for argument, in a sort of quasi-historic setting. I mean, there's plenty of examples of powder-coated aluminium windows being used in conservation areas in heritage buildings. They provide very clean lines. They also provide that sort of recognition that actually we're dealing with an extension that's 21st century, rather than something that was back in the sort of 20th century, back in certainly when this was done in sort of 1980s. So I think it provides that nice that contrast between the old and new. And this is, of course, going to be a modern extension with all the attributes of a 21st century extension. So I think I have no issue with the use of powder coated aluminium. I think it provides that nice sort of offset. Works well in buildings such as this, and as I say, it's fairly commonplace in lots of heritage assets and areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Guthrie.
Could you just clarify that I think you said that the prior proposal was larger than the current proposal. Could you clarify that?
Yes.
Yes. And by what scale?
I haven't got those figures to hand, I'm afraid.
And in the sort of pre-app, presumably the officer recommended to downsize.
Yeah.
But without, you don't have any figures.
My understanding of I wasn't directly involved in the pre-app, so I'm sort of picked it up. But my understanding is that they were looking for something similar along the lines of the conservatory, coming out lengthwise and not a lot bigger, or replacing that with something slightly larger, which to be honest with you, when I referred to the internal circulation space.
Just to remind us that we're dealing with the application that's in front of us. Not
sorry, that was the suggestion.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Right, if that's all the questions for the moment, thank you very much, Mr. Pearce. And our next registered speaker is Councillor Jones from Germans Week Parish Councillor. Pull the device as close to you as comfortable. You have 3 minutes, so in your own time, when you're ready, please start. Press the button. That's it.
There we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for allowing me to come and speak to you. I represent the Germans Week Parish Council. I'm also a member of the Parochial Church Council. I was asked to attend this meeting by the Parish Council to make you aware of the villagers and of their opinions and of those who care for and attend our church. The main reasons for the refusal, as I see it, is that it will impact the setting of the church, it doesn't conserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, and the proposed design is inappropriate and at odds with the existing cottage. The Parochial Church Council were approached for their opinion on this proposed extension last year. It's unfortunate, and there was a misunderstanding, I understand, that it didn't get to you earlier. So it was not something that has been requested at the last minute. The Parochial Church Council are well acquainted with the church and its surrounds throughout the year. I have been a regular churchgoer there since we moved in 2019, and until this issue was raised, some of us, and I include myself in this, were not even aware there was a building to the south and east of the church because of the way you come out of the church and move to the southwest, and Nightingale Cottage is way off to the east. So, walking in and out of the church, you don't see it. The Parochial Church Council, having viewed both sites and the plans, concluded in their letter to the Borough Council as so. The proposed extension will not, in the PCC's view, cause any harmful changes to views to or from the church or erode the relationship of the church to its wider setting. In addition, more than 300 mixed trees have been planted along the bank on the southern border of the church, which will enhance the privacy of both the church and Nightingale Cottage. There are houses on the church's northern boundary, which you could have seen from the maps that were shown, which may be seen as you approach the church and enter the churchyard, with variously rendered walls that are L-shaped and with PVC and wooden windows, and they do not impact on the setting of the church. Appearance and character of the conservation area. I understand that the local planning association requested that any extension be made different from the current cottage, and I understand from the plans that the extension will have a slate roof. The walls will be a mixture of render and stone with a small area of wooden cladding. There will be a small flat roof. The extension will make the property L-shaped with large window sliding doors overlooking the wonderful view down the valley to the lake. And those of you who've seen it will understand what I mean when I say it's a wonderful view. Germansweek Parish Conservation Area has an eclectic mix of housing design.
You're running close to your time.
Please, very quickly. A Grade 2 listed thatched cottage with a flat roof extension situated on the road, a house with a corrugated roof, a number of L-shaped properties, barn conversions immediately adjacent to Nightingale Cottage where the finish is a mixture of render and stone, a house to the west of Nightingale Cottage with similar views that was given planning permission for large French windows overlooking the lake. Nightingale Cottage is a very private property. The proposed extension will not, in our view, be out of character within the conservation area, indeed will be similar to many. As the Parish Council reported, we support the application because it is discreet, it cannot be seen, it does not overlook, nor is it overlooked. There is no impact to anyone nearby. No one in the parish has opposed or opposes this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, have you got any questions for Councillor Jones? You're off scot-free. Thank you very much. Our next registered speaker is the ward member, Councillor Terry Southcott, no stranger to the committee as he's the vice chair, so he knows the rules. As the ward member, he has 5 minutes to speak. So when you're ready, please get going.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am well aware of the time limit. I don't expect I'll need anything like that time. Brought this application into committee on specific reasons. Hence, I'm not sitting in my normal place. I'll go through them one at a time. I trust the members that attended the site visit also took the opportunity to go in around to the entrance of the church and assessing the view from that position. I appreciate that the time of the year, the trees are all in heavy leaf and makes it very difficult to see Nightingale Cottage. I trust also that you took note of the amount of relatively new planting, so I think that this takes place on the lower border of the churchyard. I would suggest that even in winter months, when these trees have shed their leaves, the number of stems will still give adequate screening to the extension for those visiting the church. Right? I think that has been clear from the officer's photograph in April. There's quite a bit of growth there. And the new growth now coming on should help a lot. Member of the Parish Council has been very clear about the Parish Council view, and I'm going to leave that matter as it is. In my reasons, I said the barn guide really doesn't hold water. It's 25 years old. This has been mentioned already. And I just cannot see the relevance of that. It's a house. It has been a house for 25 years. It should be looked upon as a house, not a barn. Again, as well put by various people, it is very much subservient to the original building as required. What I will point out is that extensions are a part of the development of this country, development around the country of all types of houses. A lot of them start with small little buildings. As technology changes, extensions are built to a different standard. And then another generation comes along and builds another extension. And eventually they end up as listed buildings. And the best one you can think of is Buckingham Palace. You know, developed over centuries, but now a listed building. Due to the location of that building, it is virtually impossible to see it. I took the opportunity yesterday of nipping out to the Rochford Lake and taking some pictures. If I could have the what's up? You can see the bridge over the Wolf River there, and the line there showing the distance to Nightingale Cottage. The measurements are still up on screen. It's about 0.6 of a mile, just over. Right. If you can have the next picture, please. I took that one of Nightingale Cottage from the bridge with a 30x zoom camera. I had a job finding it with the naked eye. I had to use the camera to actually find it. Just to give you a context, it is well secluded, and I really cannot see any problem with an extension on that building. And that is where I will leave it. Open to questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Councillor Southcott? No? Okay, thanks very much. Right, members, we've had a good presentation. We've had 3 registered speakers. We've had questions. We're now in debate before we move to a vote on this. So does anyone wish to say anything before we do move to a vote? No? Right, in which case we will do that. We'll move to the vote. The officer's recommendation is for refusal. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation? Councillor Moody. You didn't want to say anything? No. You looked as though you did. You put your hand up. Right. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation for refusal, please now show.
Devon, Chair.
In which case the application...
Can you...
Those against? Thank you very much. In which case the application is refused. Thank you very much. We now move on to the next application, which is 105424, Pitscombe, Lamerton. A retrospective application for conversion of a barn to a holiday let. We're just changing over the planning officers, so bear with us.
Chair, I just wonder whether I could ask the question, would you like me to withdraw from the committee in the same manner that Councillor Southcott has just done? I don't know whether that requires a legal officer's advice.
I'll put that to our legal officer.
My view is that I would nevertheless still be able to listen to the arguments that are put forward and make a decision, but I'm happy to be advised to the contrary.
Mr. Fairburn, did you catch that question?
I did indeed, Chairman. I'm just looking at the reasons Councillor Jury gave for calling the matter into committee, I think providing he's saying that he is able to approach the matter with an open mind and is prepared to listen to other members' views and indeed what the officer has to say on the application, then I think he's okay to stay. Take part in the decision, although obviously speaking as if he speaks as a ward member, then obviously he needs to be careful in terms of what he might say by way of predetermination. Thank you, Chairman.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Jury?
I'm content with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, are we ready to go? So we're now on to Pitscombe, Lamerton, and over to the planning officer for her report.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application located at Pitscombe in Lamerton. I just want to start with a little brief update. Since the publication of my officer report, we've had 3 letters of support in. So I'll just run through the key points made for you, as I would do if they were in the report. So the conversation was regarding local businesses, employment, diversification, traffic impacts, the economy, and impact upon the countryside. The application site is located northeast of Lamerton. I've identified it there in the red box for you. The application site is approximately 2 kilometres from Lamerton, and it is located within the Tamar EMS zone. The application site is accessed through this track here, and then this is the wider site, and the building subject to the application is in the red box. This is more zoomed in for you so you can see the wider site. So the application red line obviously is quite long for the access, and then the host dwelling is this one here. So it is attached to the application site, and these are existing other agricultural and domestic buildings within the wider site context. There is a public right-of-way which does run through the site, but I've got a map in a later slide to show you where that goes and connects to. So the proposal is retrospective consent. I've shown the ground floor and first floor plans for you, just to show you there is no changes proposed. So I think I'm going to start with the background just to explain where we are. So in 2013, there was an application which was change of use of a barn to a holiday let C2 use with associated D1 use. That was approved conditionally, and condition 3 meant that the 2 uses need to operate in connection with each other. So the C2 use, which is the associated residential accommodation, is wholly reliant upon the D1 use, which was for an educational studio. That was the starting point for this application site. In 2019, that holiday use did begin. The D1 use has never begun. That has been confirmed to us during the application process. So the starting point is, although it is holiday accommodation now, it should be reliant upon the D1 use in connection with the previous condition, which is operating not in connection with at the moment. So that is the first floor. So you enter at first floor. You've got, I'll just read that out to you. So there's a studio which was associated with the D1 use, the dining, kitchen and living area. There is also some external amenity space. And then the ground floor is 4 bedrooms, which are all en suite, and then there is a staircase between the two. There's no access at lower ground floor. There are two minor external changes as part of this application. So one is the metal flue, and then there's an alteration to the number of roof lights. So it has been built with 2. Previously, there was approved for 3. There is parking for this application site, which is identified there at the red arrow, and then the other red lines go to the soak away for surface drainage and then package treatment plant for foul. So this is a photograph looking southeast in towards the application site. That blue sign there on the right-hand side does just say Pittscombe. This is the building, the application site. The parking area is up here, and then you walk round in to access the first floor. The white building at the end is not part of this proposal, that's the host dwelling. You can also see the flue and then the roof lights as well. There's another picture there of the access to the building and then the parking area. This is part of the amenity area, and towards the access there's a hot tub there. And then there's an external seating area, and you can see the door into the building, which is here on the right-hand side. So I've shared this plan, which is to talk about the public rights of way in and around Lamerton. So footpath 9 does run through the site. So it runs through the site, this is the site here, and then connects up to the northwest. There is then a bridleway 27, which continues north, and then there is another footpath here, number 8. But none of these footpaths connect to get you into the centre of Lamerton, so we would assume that users of the building would then walk down the road in towards Lamerton, which is approximately 2 kilometres, so 20 to 25 minute, half an hour walk each way, which is unlit and single track car width in places, no pedestrian footpaths. There's the application site entrance again, and you can see the road going down towards Lamerton. I've put the key policies here for you just to chat them through. They are obviously covered in the report, but the starting point is the hierarchy of policies for us, so sustainable development, which then leads down into the TTV area and the growth within settlements. This application site is in the countryside, so Tier 4. We have assessed the application with TTV 26.1 because it is isolated, and the second part of that policy. We have gone through and finally balanced the rural economy and where we can support development in the rural economy and balance that with regards to its location. That has been finally balanced in the report. We've also looked at the environmental transport impacts with regards to 6 and 7 of Dev 29, and we've also looked at the low carbon development. So all of these policies have been balanced to arriving at the judgment we've got to. So the key issues for us as officers is the holiday accommodation in its location, which we think is unsustainable. There are implications of the previous consent and that condition number 3, which is copied in full in the officer report. And then there are economic and policy considerations as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, have you got questions for the planning officer at this stage? I have just one. In your report, you mentioned that there hasn't been a assessment of need for holiday accommodation of this sort. Elsewhere in the report, I think I've read that, or it might have been in Councillor Jury's statement, I can't remember which, that it's proved to have been popular. I mean, it's been occupied. And I was trying to get my mind round whether one is a substitute for the other. The fact that it's popular and full, does that demonstrate in any sense a need? Do you see the line of questioning I'm going down?
Yes, so under policy 50, Dev 15.7 talks about identified local need. If there is a demand, that is assessed differently to need. So although it has been popular, which has been, information has been provided to us about that, we haven't received any information that there is a need for a 4-bed ensuite holiday accommodation in this location.
Okay, I'll get my mind around that. Any other questions from the committee at this stage before we go to our registered speakers? No? Okay, our first registered speaker is Emily Hayden. Good morning. I know you know the ropes, but when you're ready, you've got 3 minutes, off you go.
Thank you. Good morning and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Following the grant of the previous permission, the barn opened its doors, but only as accommodation. This was partly due to the applicant's age and poor health at the time, which meant that they would have struggled to run courses, but also due to there being a high demand for tourist accommodation. The let has since been running successfully and has a 5-star rating. Policy TTV 26 lists the types of development in the countryside which the Council considers to support the principles of sustainable development. The first part of the policy applies to isolated locations and says that in such locations, proposals which secure the reuse of significant heritage assets or redundant buildings will be supported. The barn is included within the Historic Environment Record as a thrashing barn dating back potentially to the mid-1700s. It is therefore a notable heritage asset. It was also redundant prior to its conversion. The second part of TTV 26 provides 6 criteria which are to be applied as appropriate. The most relevant criteria here is number 2, which says that proposals should reuse traditional buildings that are structurally sound without significant enhancement or alteration. The Council concluded as part of the previous application that the barn was structurally sound, that its conversion required minor alterations and would result in an enhancement to the immediate area. The application therefore complies with TTV 26 and the development plan when taken as a whole, which recognises the reuse of historic and disused buildings as a form of sustainable development. The Climate Emergency Planning Statement also lists the reuse of existing buildings as a core strategic objective. Regarding Dev 15 and whether the site is in a suitable location, the barn is on the route of a public footpath which can be used to access the village, where there are bus connections, a play area and a pub. The site also has facilities which guests can and do use, including large gardens, a tennis court and hot tub. Regarding need, Dev 15 does not require evidence of need where proposals are for the reuse of existing buildings. The issue of need relates to camping, caravan, chalet style or other similar form of accommodation. This was confirmed in a recent appeal for the conversion of an existing building into a holiday let in a countryside location some 20 minutes away. In allowing that appeal, the inspector said that due to the robust nature of the building being converted, it could not be treated as a tent, caravan or chalet, and so the part of the policy relating to need was not applicable. This is the same here. Finally, I want to touch on the let's role within the local economy. The applicant pays circa £12,000 each year to local businesses such as cleaners, chimney sweeps, groundsmen and so on. This is separate to the amounts guests spend in the area during their stays, which will also be in the tens of thousands per year. The barn's guest book contains numerous entries where guests talk about dining at the pub in Lamerton, as well as grabbing lunch in Tavistock. The economic benefits are not insignificant, and it's proposals like these which help prop up our hospitality industry, and which should therefore be supported. The application had the full support of the parish council, the meeting that I attended, and it was unanimously supported and had 3 letters of support, including one from a local business. It just goes to show that people who live and work in the area want things like these to happen. Thank you and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Well done for keeping to the time. Are there any questions? Councillor Guthrie.
Just to clarify, because we are discussing obviously what's in front of us, but the whole remit originally related to the studio, and I think you said that business never took off because of the health of the, is that correct?
Yeah, the applicants are an elderly couple in their mid-80s now. When they had the permission, Mrs. Gent, who is the wife of the applicant, she's very artistic. A lot of there's a tapestry in the holiday let, which is a beautiful piece of art that she's produced. And the intention was for her to run crafts and art courses from the barn, but just because of her health and age at the time, it took, because when they had the permission in 2013, it took, I think, 4 years to actually complete the works. It's quite a hefty job. And by that time, her health and age was such that it just wasn't feasible to do them at the time. And so they opened the barn as a holiday let. It's done very well. genuinely didn't know they had to do the courses in conjunction with the holiday accommodation. It's only because, having invited me to go around there and have a look at their property, they're in the process of hopefully selling and downsizing for them, I noticed that they are actually operating in breach of that condition, and I advised them to get planning permission to regularise the use. This is where it's all come about. But yeah, it was a genuine mistake, and they were just incapable of running the courses at the time that they were ready to open the barn.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Mott.
Thank you. You said that the applicants were unable to run courses. Have they explored the possibility of others running courses on site?
No, and I don't think they'd want that. Like I say, they're an elderly couple. It's a very tranquil area, and the idea of having several groups of people coming and teachers and things coming to the site to run courses just wouldn't be appropriate for them. Their house is physically attached to the barn, and they've found that by having it as a holiday let is appropriate for them and their own amenity. I think introducing an educational use at this point would, I think, cause more harm than good.
Okay, I have one question. I'll come to you in a minute, Councillor Wakeham. You mentioned in your address that, in your view, identification of need was not required. I wonder if the planning officer has a contrary view to that. Well, I'm sure she does.
We do. So I know the appeal that Emily is talking about. Under Dev 15.7, it does say camping, caravan, chalet or similar facilities respond to an identified local need. So that's where we think the need comes from.
You're clear in your mind that holiday accommodation is part and parcel of that?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeham.
Could you just clarify about the footpath? Because the officers said it didn't go to the village, and you're saying it does go to the village?
It does go to the village. So the footpath, it goes in a northwesterly direction, joins the bridleway, and then heads directly south towards Lamerton.
Is there any reason why the purple line stops halfway down?
Joins a lane.
That's just the mapping we've got from Devon County Council.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Chairman, that's also where it joins the road.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The other registered speaker is the ward member, Councillor Jury. No need to move, Councillor Jury. You can say what you need to from there.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't think I'll need the allotted time, so I will try and be brief. I have set out the reasons why I called the application in, and they're included in the report. And as part of that, and following that, I've had some very useful discussions with Ms Easter, and I'm grateful for that, and I understand completely where the planning officer is coming from. I think we also accept that the position is currently in breach of existing planning permission, but nevertheless, the planning permission was given. The facility exists and it is in use. And my view would be that that use and the popularity is evidence of need, and that would be my contention in that part. I'm also aware that the application has been fully supported by the parish council. As you've heard from the submissions that have been given so far, the original planning application brought back into use a rural asset or building, and that is now being used. The local employment aspect, I think, is important, as is the use of local amenities. I'm also mindful that if we think back a couple of meetings of this committee ago, we fully accepted that Lamerton itself is a sustainable development, and we agreed to an application for some housing in Lamerton, despite the very clear position that the people who lived in those houses would need to use their cars for employment or shopping purposes. And we also refused a planning application that was 1.2 kilometres, I think, away from Tavistock. So I am a bit confused, I must admit, about the sustainability argument and where we go on this. Nevertheless, I think this is a small-scale development. It exists already. I don't think that regularising the position that there is at the moment would do any harm to the environment or to the setting. And my contention when calling it in was to ask the committee to review and look again at the planning officer's recommendation. That's what I would like to say, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, any questions for Councillor Jury? Nope. Any other points the members of the committee would wish to make before we move to a vote on this? Okay, we will move to a vote. The recommendation in front of you, the officer's report, is for refusal. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation for refusal, please show. Those against the officer's recommendation? Okay.
Can I just have the hands up again, please? For against.
Sorry, again?
Yeah, I just need to, yeah.
Right, the committee has determined not to accept the officer's recommendation, so would a member of the committee like to propose an alternative recommendation?
Chair, I'd like to propose, if I may, that the application be approved, and if I could perhaps add to that, that I do think, despite the comments I made in my notes, that we should include within that approval that a contribution is made to the Plymouth South and Estuaries European Marine Site in order to fulfil that aspect of the planning requirements.
Just repeat that last bit. Your condition?
Certainly. So I would like to move that the planning application is approved with a condition that the mitigation through a donation is made to help manage the additional recreational pressures on the Plymouth South and Estuaries European Marine Site.
If I could just advise members that clearly you've gone against the officer recommendation. So if you want to make this new proposal, then we need some policy reasons as to why we've gone against the officer recommendation. So as to why you've made this alternative recommendation. So if you could provide those for me, that would be helpful. I'm very, very happy to help find those policy reasons if you need that help. But I think it's important that occurs.
Well, I think my contention, Chair, would be that the proposal does meet TTV1, TTV2, TTV26 and DEV15, and on those grounds I would propose approval.
Yes, I think what you're saying is it's a balanced judgment where two policies butt against each other, and the view of the committee comes down in favour of supporting the rural economy rather than preservation of the rural landscape.
Thank you very much.
On that basis, that the proposition in front of us now, Councillor Mott.
If I'm being asked to consider to approve this application, I would also expect to see a condition in there that would show how it aims to deliver its carbon reduction measures, because that point has also not been addressed.
I'd be very happy to accept that as an additional requirement. I think that would be very sensible. Thank you, Councillor Mott.
Is that something we can condition?
Chair. Chairman.
David
If I may. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to interrupt, but could I suggest that, in fact, the proposal is that it's delegated to the Head of Development Management to approve, subject to a contribution to the Tamar Estuaries, and conditions to be agreed in consultation with Chairman, Vice Chairman and proposer and seconder.
Very happy to accept that proposal. So on the basis that we... Can we have a seconder for that? Councillor Guthrie. So on the basis that we approve the recommendation, subject to suitable conditions being agreed by the Chair and the Vice Chair and the Head of Planning, All those in favour of that, please show. Those against? That's carried. So that application is approved, subject to conditions being agreed. Thank you. Right, we move on to the final application today, which is 221522. Land north of the B3257 in Biralston, Yelverton. A re-advertisement, revised plans and documents, including inclusion of PV solar panels on buildings, inclusion of bus stops, amended footways, amended lighting, amended biodiversity net gain, erection of community convenience retail store, access, vehicle parking and landscaping. Now, just before we get our teeth into this, I just want to make a few points, if I may. You'll recall, members of the committee, that the committee previously voted not to support the officer's recommendation for refusal of this application. The decision was then to defer the application until S106 and conditions had been tabled. The officer's revised report, which we'll hear about in a minute, remains with a recommendation of refusal. And finally, having checked with the legal advice, no representations from the parish council, the applicant or ward member are permitted. And finally, this is a return of this application, only those members that were present when this application was previously considered will be permitted to vote. Good, for the benefit of everyone, can I just have a show of hands, please, those that were here for the first time this application was considered. So you're clear that only those members can vote this time round. Just wanted to be absolutely clear we knew what we were doing. Thank you very much. So I will now hand over to the planning officer for his updated report.
Good morning. Am I feeding back? Yes. Right, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, obviously members will recall this application was considered at the Planning Committee in February when it was deferred for further consideration. You'll note the addendum report I have produced, which sets out the minutes of the meeting and the reasons for the application's deferral. A number of updates I have for members which are set out in the addendum, but I'll go through these in more detail. Since the last meeting, there have been discussions with the applicant on a number of points which arise from the committee resolution. I'll take members through those. I've also had discussions with the applicant with regard to the matter of conditions in the event that members decide to seek to grant planning permission today. Those conditions have been standard conditions, which you'd expect us to impose anyway, but also there have been conditions we've discussed with the applicant with regard to the matter of retail impact in order to try and mitigate the impact upon the retail centre as far as we reasonably can with conditions. In terms of updates, so this is the application site. We're all familiar with that, I'm sure, on the eastern side of Bere Alston. First change we have is a revised layout. Members will recall at the last committee there was discussion with the highway officer and ourselves and yourselves with regard to the provision of bus stops. The earlier iteration of this drawing didn't show bus stops on either side of the road and relied upon effectively a request stop round the corner in the Downs, which is the closest bus stop to this site. We now have a revised layout which shows bus stops on either side of the road. You can see yellow rectangles both on the store side of the road just to the east and again on the south side of the road close to the crossroads. This revised plan also shows amended footway details to reach both bus stops. But beyond that, the off-site works, including a pavement link to link with the existing footways, are as before. In all other respects, this layout is the same. In providing the footways, though, the applicants have set back the hedges to both sides of the footway and are proposing replacement hedges to either side. That would be dealt with by condition, subject to the decision taken today. We also have revised lighting details. If members recall, there was concern at the last meeting about the amount of illumination, given that the site lies within the national landscape, and the fact that many of the lights proposed within the site were street lamp style lights on columns or floodlights around the service area and yard. What we now have is revised lighting which reduces all of the lights to bollard style lighting, so low, not lamp standards, but lamps set on bollards of low stature, which reduces the level of illumination as well. This is the lighting ISO lines, but if you compare this with the lighting before, you will see that the levels of lighting within the site are reduced. With regard to the store itself, the plans are effectively unchanged. What we do have, though, on the front south elevation, this is the one elevation proposed before, we now have a range of PV panels on the roof facing south, which again responds to a point raised by members. So, in terms of key issues, I'll take members through these in a minute, but I do have a number of updates in terms of consultation responses and letters of representation first. Firstly, just to correct the Highway Authority's recommendation, I've picked up with Phil Townsend, who I believe is here today, that there is actually a line missing from his recommendation. Members will recall before that highways are seeking a contribution towards consideration of changing the speed limit in this section of road. What the recommendation should refer to is a contribution of £5,000 towards the investigation, consideration and, if approved, following the due democratic process, the installation of any associated signage and additional ancillary lighting or illumination for the extension of the 30-mile-an-hour north-eastwards from its current terminal point to a position to be agreed with the Highway Authority. And obviously, if members wish to clarify that, I'm sure Mr. Townsend will provide further commentary on that in his speech. Beyond that, on that, I also have a letter from West Country Land, who are the applicants, which I shall read in some detail. This responds again to the addendum report and various points in that. Firstly, one of the points raised by by Jack at the last committee was the possibility of a Section 106 agreement to somehow control the future occupation and use of the existing co-op store in Bere Alston. I have touched on this in the addendum, but the applicants have come back further and said the existing co-op store in Bere Alston does not form part of this application and is in separate ownership, and therefore a Section 106 could not be pursued for this. It's important to state any change of use relating to the existing store would be subject to a planning application, and therefore the council do retain some control over the use/reuse of the site. Goes on to say, it is considered that the proposed development can be adequately controlled by the use of planning conditions. A draft retail planning condition has now been agreed with the LPA, which prevents the new co-op from directly competing with other existing retailers in the village, limiting the floor area for comparison sales and restricting the use of an on-site bakery, butchery and pharmacy. Please bear in mind that this application will relocate the existing co-op store, which has no such restrictions at present. We feel that this fully addresses any potential retail impact on existing stores, as does our locally based retail consultant. The letter goes on to talk about the fact that the co-op is their preferred operator of the store. Appreciate that from an officer's point of view, this is not a personal application, and members will appreciate that this has been discussed at the last committee. But nevertheless, this is the applicant's pitch. They go on to say, it is a planning application that is entirely focused on the provision of a co-op store. There is no other retailer involved. The planning officer in his report has tried to imply that this is an application for a generic retail store, and they have stated that it may not be for the co-op. Fundamentally, this is a co-op store for co-op. There is a contract in place between the applicant, West Country Land, and co-op. If the application is successful, it will be delivered for co-op under a build and lease back agreement. Also refers to what they say is one fundamental aspect of the scheme that appears to have been overlooked, which is what happens if co-op do not relocate to this site. They go on to repeat earlier comments that the co-op have confirmed that the existing store is substandard for customers, staff, and operationally it does not have disabled access and will close in 2025. Neither the planning officer nor their retail consultant have considered this in their assessment of the application. The closure of the existing co-op without a suitable replacement in the village will be catastrophic for Bere Alston and the entire peninsula, as all shopping will then be reliant upon transport to Tavistock, Yelverton or Plymouth, and this is more likely to lead to the closure of other retailers in the centre of Bere Alston. The lack of weight applied to the loss of the convenience store altogether is alarming.
I just want to make a point about that comment, members. Clearly, you are being asked to consider whether it's clearly you're being asked to consider whether it's appropriate to allow a retail store, not a co-op, a retail store on the edge of Bere Alston. The issues and discussed by the applicant in relation to what will happen to the co-op store in the village is not relevant to your consideration of this application. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. I would also say in response to that we have considered this in our assessment, and it's set out in the earlier officer report. We have no control over the future of the co-op store, whether it stays open or closes. It is acknowledged if it does close, it will have a significant effect, but we as a council do not have control over that. And as I say, the applicant is not happy or not content to offer a Section 106 agreement to allow us to have some control over that. It also refers to the fact that since this application was previously considered by the Planning Committee, a housing scheme opposite the site has now received a resolution to grant approval, which in the applicant's view materially extends the village into the open countryside opposite the site and changes the built context and backdrop of the new store when viewed in the wider landscape. And in relation to vehicular access, which is serviced by Woolacombe Road, I would note for members that the site opposite, yes, it now has a resolution to grant planning permission. It is an allocated site. I think as an officer, I would distinguish that from an unallocated site within the open countryside, which the current application site is. With regards to highway access bus stops and the 30-mile-an-hour extension, I will read that verbatim. The inclusion of request bus stops along the road frontage are agreed with the Highway Authority. We note that the Parish Council would prefer the bus to enter the site for the bus stop. This can only be implemented by agreement with the operator, who we understand may be amenable to this, and the turning head within the scheme is suitably sized to accommodate this. So this can be implemented if the operator is prepared to do so, but highways are also satisfied that the bus stops provide a compliance scheme within the public highway, which is more usual for a convenience store of this type. Applicants also refer to the offer of PV panels, which I've shown you, which are now included on the south-facing roof of the building. Revised lighting arrangements, which again, I agree, significantly reduce the impact of the original proposal. And then go on to talk about issue of noise, referring to the fact that officers are still proposing a reason for refusal based on noise impact upon Highfield, which is the adjacent residential property, and querying that because one of the draft planning conditions also proposed in our addendum relates to the control of noise. I think as an officer I would distinguish, and I think we've done so in our earlier report, our own analysis on noise impact, which is based upon on policy Dev 1, which assesses noise on the basis of prevailing conditions, and we would and have assessed this on the basis that the site is effectively an agricultural field, and therefore the occupiers of Highfield currently experience, in our view, a high standard of amenity and tranquil conditions, which would be contrasted with operation of a store from early morning to late in the evening, with noise and activity and disturbance associated with that. That's the letter from the applicant. There is also a letter from the co-op. You will be aware of what Jack has just said, and therefore a note of caution, but this is a letter that has been received from the co-op. We have been a key part of the local community for several decades and are keen to continue to provide an important service to residents. However, the proposed relocation is an integral component in our continued ability to serve the community. The highly compromised layout and structure of the existing freehold unit make it unviable from a refit point of view for numerous reasons as specified in previous correspondence. Customer feedback has also reflected these deficiencies, particularly with regard to the limited range of products available within the existing store. We are now seeking a new convenience store which is fit for purpose and will service the needs of Borough Alston for the foreseeable future. Proposed new store will continue to serve the residents and importantly will provide an improved and wider range of goods for both top-up and main food shops. Significantly, being able to provide a store to cater for main food shops will reduce the need for local residents to travel elsewhere. If the relocation scheme is not delivered, it is unlikely the existing store will remain operationally viable beyond 2025. Should the planning application be approved and the relocation unit delivered, the existing freehold store, which comprises the ground floor only, will be placed on the open market for a period of 12 months to find a tenant. Any change to the existing use class will be subject to a planning application to the council, providing sufficient control over the property's use. Also have a letter from Borough Parish Council, which raises 2 points, I think, based on the submitted addendum. Commenting, the response of Borough Parish Council dated the 12th of June 2024 is shown as object. We have consistently stated that this council recommends the application subject to the additional conditions regarding bus stop, street lighting and moving the 30-mile-an-hour limit to the east. Secondly, we have been advised that it is acceptable that a further condition can be imposed as follows, that the application can only be approved by members if a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit is extended from the east side of the Bowling Green entrance to the down crossroads with suitable street lighting covering the persons crossing and then at 200-yard intervals in accordance with the relevant traffic law. This will be financed by the applicant. I believe Mr. Townsend will be available to comment on highway matters. Members will note that the Highway Authority's recommendation is already subject to consideration of moving the speed limit and a financial consideration in that regard. Mr Townsend, I'm sure, can elaborate as further as necessary. Beyond that, members, there have been 2 further letters of representation which object to the proposal on the following broad grounds. Firstly, expressing surprise that the existing store, whilst it has its drawbacks, is now not deemed fit for purpose. Note that the permission to improve access into the existing co-op store was sought, but has since been allowed to lapse. Notes that the units existing in the co-op store have been available, but have not been acquired by the co-op. One letter notes that whilst the writer's wife walks to the existing store, she will now drive to the proposed store if approved, and comments that the new store will undoubtedly result in increased motor traffic that will not be countered by less journeys to Tavistock to shop. Raises concerns regarding the harm to the viability of shops in 4 Street, highlights that the Tamar Valley National Landscape have confirmed their objection to the scheme, notes that the need for the development has not been brought about by local demand or the determination of the neighbourhood plan, and finally raising concerns that the approval will set in motion an irreversible change to the special historic character of Beer Alston. Chairman, members, that completes all of the updates in terms of representations. The key issues remain effectively as set out here. We have considered, obviously, the new information submitted by the applicants, but that does not change our recommendation. We are therefore still recommending the application for refusal for the 4 reasons as set out. So therefore, in terms of conclusions and planning balance, the key concerns are set out as per the officer's recommendation as before. There are 4 reasons for refusal: fundamental concerns regarding the retail impact of the proposal on the village centre, the presence of the store in the national landscape, concerns both relating to the lighting, albeit reduced, plus the presence of the building in what is currently an open landscape. On balance, concerns relating to the impact on the residential amenity of Highfield, and again, in terms of the shopping patterns we believe are likely to result from the use of this store, a rise rather than a reduction in motor transport visits, which we do not believe results in sustainable transport patterns. There are some planning benefits. We have taken these into consideration. Members will note that the application would create a number of new jobs. There are also biodiversity enhancements, but overall, our recommendation, Chairman, remains as one of refusal. But as you will note from the officer's report, there are a number of conditions set out in the addendum that members may wish to have regard to if they take a different view to ourselves and weigh the issues differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive update. Members of the committee, have you got questions for the planning officer? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. The applicant implies that the closure of the co-op within the village centre would be detrimental for people wishing to shop there, but my belief is that there is also another convenience store within the village that they are able to access. Is that correct, please? Can you confirm?
There is a second store, Premier convenience store within the village centre as well, yes.
Councillor Jerry.
Thank you, and I'm grateful to the officers for the work they've obviously put into this following our previous consideration of this at committee. My question really revolves around the lighting, and in particular the national landscape opinion on that. And I have to confess, I think this was something that got slightly, I was going to say obscured, but no pun intended, when we last looked at it, because we were focusing on some other issues. But it's obviously a really important subject. I note that the conversations you've had have resulted in improvements to the lighting scheme, but that the national landscape is still saying that their recommendation would be for refusal based on the light pollution that is going to be emitted. How much weight does that opinion have on our considerations, or should have on our considerations. Is that something you would be able to answer for us?
The site is, as your members will know, a national landscape, so we do have a responsibility to conserve the landscape and scenic beauty of the national landscape and enhance. So it's a matter of some gravity, you know, and in our assessment, it's a matter that we would give significant weight to. So it's the lighting is obviously a component of that. It's currently a dark site. There is no illumination within the site. I understand the applicant's view that it's on the edge of the village, but this is clearly a site that needs to be considered on its own merits, and it will clearly change the way the site is experienced in the evening, change the access into the village. Lighting is a component of the harm caused to the national landscape alongside the presence of the building and the urbanisation of the site generally.
Can I just add to that as well? Obviously the MPPF and the Joint Local Plan ask officers in considering applications to give great weight to the national landscape in any decision made, so just for your information.
Can I ask a supplementary that is sort of related to that, but also would like to bring in your very obvious conclusion that the site is on the edge of the existing settlement and in the open countryside. Does our consideration of that change at all by virtue of the fact that we have recently agreed a proposal for housing on the opposite side of the road, which in effect I think extends the boundary of the village in the same direction, but albeit on the opposite side of the road? Does that make sense?
It doesn't change my view. I mean, the site on the opposite side of the road is an allocated site, so there was a full expectation that that site would come forward for development, and that lighting will be a component of that development. This is an unallocated greenfield site beyond the edge of the village. As explained before, it is an agricultural field. There is no development on it currently, so we are assessing the value of it as part of the national landscape in that context. Yes, it's on the edge of the village, and the applicants and their landscape consultants in doing the landscape and visual impact assessment have asked us, and therefore yourselves, to consider that. But it is nevertheless an agricultural field that is undeveloped, so we are considering the change to that in our assessment.
Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. On the lighting issue, continuing that questioning, have we agreed, or I know in your addendum report you're suggesting that that lighting strategy minimises. Do we have a period of operation where lighting would go off, and would that mitigate in some way the effect on the countryside?
The lighting would be on for the duration of the store's operation. So it would come on when the store opens, it would go off when the store closes. It won't be on 24 hours a day. So there will clearly be times when there is no illumination.
Is that a mitigating component to a lighting strategy that could influence our decision on the effect on the countryside by the lighting?
I would say not. I mean, there is still harm caused when the lights are on. I appreciate they won't be on for 24 hours a day, but given the length of the store hours, they would still be on for an appreciable time of the day and longer during the winter than the summer.
Any other questions for the planning officer? I have one. I'll come to you in a minute, Councillor Leach, if I may. There's this sort of ambiguity about whether it's a co-op or whether it's a retail store. In the correspondence you've had, some will claim unambiguously that it's a co-op, whereas the application in front of us is for a retail store, not necessarily a co-op. Would it be possible, were members to approve this application, for a condition to be placed that it is only approved on the basis that it is a co-op?
No. In short answer, no. You cannot you cannot specify a retailer in an application of this nature. The application it's about the use of the land. So the use of the land would be retail as opposed to agricultural field if members were to go against the officer recommendation.
Thank you for that. Right, Councillor Leach.
I can't vote on this because that wasn't before, but just for my satisfaction, lighting, should the 30-mile speed limit be moved along that road, surely the lighting from the road lighting would have an effect on, and that's on, well, I dare say that can be turned off sometime in the night, but that'll have a bigger impact than the actual site.
Chairman,
Yes,
may I interrupt?
David Fairbairn would like to come in.
Any member who wasn't present with the previous meeting shouldn't be, apart from not voting, shouldn't actually be participating in the discussion because they weren't party to the original meeting. It's a complete blanket in terms of participation and voting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Could I ask the same question, please? Also, my other point is the effect of the development that's been approved for housing, is there will be light pollution from that development, including the street lighting on the road, which, so both those two things, which don't apply to this development, will have an effect on the natural environment.
Yeah, I agree. Any comment on that?
In terms of street lighting, again, I think Mr. Townsend will probably be speaking to you about highways if you ask him questions directly. But my understanding is if, and it's obviously a big if because the county council will need to consider this, if the speed limit is changed to 30 miles an hour, there would need to be street lighting in that section because I think that is a component of reducing the speed limit. But that is not something that is on the table today. All that is on the table from the county council is, if the application is approved, a recommendation that they consider the lighting. I don't know if David has comments on that, but I would not have thought it was material to consider the impact of street lighting that is not currently a component of this application. It relates to off-site works.
Yes, we can only assess what's in front of us.
That would be my view.
Have you any comment on that?
Chairman, I totally agree with your comment and the comment of the case officer.
Thank you. Any other questions for the planning officer at this stage? Well, we have no registered speakers. I just want to reiterate the process, as it were. Based on the information you've now heard, which is an update on the previous information we considered in February, those members that were here in February and voted, does anyone wish to move a recommendation to support the officer's recommendation for refusal? Councillor Mott.
I'm happy, Chairman, to move the recommendation for refusal as it is development within the recognised national landscape and the impact thereon.
That's based on information that has come to light since the February meeting.
I voted with the officer recommendation the last time, Chairman, and I continue to support that view.
Can I have a seconder for that recommendation? Seconder? Councillor Jury. So we have a recommendation for refusal in support of the officer's recommendation. Those in favour, those who were here in February, who are in... Is there
any debate at this point?
Sorry, yes, sorry, debate on that. Councillor Jerry.
Thank you. I'm speaking as someone who voted against the officer's recommendation the last time, and I think my grounds for doing that were mainly focused around the argument about sustainability, and I think I'm still in that position. I'm not sure I entirely agree that this site in itself is going to result in more car journeys rather than fewer car journeys. My view would still be, and I can only put myself in the shoes of someone living in Birrelstone, as indeed my daughter was until a couple of years ago, that I might find myself on the way home from work and pop in and do a bit of shopping rather than driving out of my way through Tavistock or even further afield. So I still feel that there is a sustainability argument to this. I'm also really mindful of the employment opportunities, and I'm really mindful of the fact that the parish council wants to support this, I think, on economic grounds. And we can see with the other sites that are allocated within Birrelstone that the population is increasing. We hope, of course, that the rail service to Plymouth might be enhanced and the effects that might have on Birrelstone in future as well, that we ought to be mindful of. I'm also mindful of the effect on the village centre if Co-op withdraw completely from that retail situation in future. So it's quite conflicting, but I've come back to thinking about the national landscapes and the light pollution and our overriding, I suppose, responsibility to make sure we protect that environment. And I'm left with the feeling that the proposal in this case should be doing better in that respect. I know it's moved part way, but I would hope from the comments that have been made that there's an even better solution. And so on those grounds, I am on balance minded not to support the officer's recommendation at this point. So I hope that is clear. I don't know whether that might engage in some debate from others, but that's my position at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you for the officers for your report and for the addendum as well, which is really helpful. I am of a similar position as Councillor Jory, that I see the objections to it. However, given the list of conditions, suggested conditions, just about all, most if not all, have been overcome by conditions. I think that it will improve local amenity and reduce travel, be more sustainable, and on balance, it's a very difficult one to decide, but on balance, I think that the conditioning and the amendments that the applicant have made to their application have swayed me to the side of not supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to make a comment? Right, we have... sorry, Councillor Mott.
Thank you. While I can appreciate improvements have been made to the application, I go back to my overriding point on this, in that the site sits within the national landscape and that has the highest level of protection on it. And without that support from the heritage officer who has been consulted on this, I fail to see how the adaptations to the application have made any positive impact on the overall detriment to the siting. That was probably not the clearest of my...
I think we know where you're coming from.
Thank you.
I voted against the officers last time, but I have since changed my mind because I just think the convenience store is going to create a lot of disturbance by way of noise and light and spoil the characteristic and the tranquility of the village. And I agree with everything that the Tamar Valley National Landscape Officer has reported.
Thank you. Any other comments from those that were here in February? Right, we have an amendment in front of us, which is to support the officer's recommendation for refusal. Everyone clear on what we're voting on? Those in favour of supporting the officer's recommendation for refusal, please now show.
All Chair.
Those against?
Is 2.
Those abstaining? No. I mean, is everyone that could vote voted? That's the point I'm making. Right, I think that's in favour of refusal. The application is refused. Thank you very much. Thank you for bearing with me on that. It was a rather unusual application, but it was important that we got the process right. We now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the planning appeals update. And here I turn to the senior planner. Are you looking for something?
I'm trying to get it up on the screen.
Granted. No, she's going to get us all a drink. Welcome back. Right, on to item 6.
Thank you, members. Apologies for the slight technical hitch there. Of the appeals that we've are on the agenda, there are only 2 which have got decisions. The rest are informing you of start date, start letters, and so on. So the 2 that have got decisions are the first one, which is I'm not going to go through the appeal reference because it means nothing probably, but it's an application for an ancillary domestic timber studio building at Willowdean, Bratton Clovelly. The application was refused by the council, but the inspector has gone against that and allowed the appeal. Just as a reminder for members so they can see where the site is, so on the edge of Bratton Clovelly. This is the house known as Willowdean, and the studio is at this point here. So again on the red line, this is Willowdean, and the studio is further down the road. The application was to utilise. The application is to utilise the studio as an ancillary accommodation to the house known as Willowdean. It was an interesting decision because the officer recommended refusal on the basis that it was physically quite remote from the house. Often with ancillary accommodation, annexes and so on, there normally needs to be some form of functional relationship, and that is either that it's attached or close by. In this case, it's over 90 metres away from the house. I think we were quite disappointed with this decision, actually, because it is quite a long way away from the host dwelling. And there's concern, obviously, that ultimately then will we get another application to ask for it to be an independent dwelling in its own right, which again the policies don't support. But the inspector did think that it could be considered as ancillary, despite being that distance away. But he did also add a condition which ensures that it remains in use as ancillary accommodation and not used as a separate dwelling. So anything of that nature would obviously need to come back to us if they were to go down that route.
Could I just ask a quicker question? Ancillary and to the house, they're sort of like ancillary living?
Yes.
Would it have facilities for washing and cooking and things like that in it?
Currently,
and toilet?
So currently the proposal as it stands does not have a kitchen or a bathroom in it. It's a studio stroke storage. That one.
If I may as well, for members, from memory as well, the grounds that it sits within are not technically within the garden area of the house either. The land it sits on is still classed as agricultural field. Yeah.
Yes, and as a result of that it may mean that they still need to apply to change the use of that land to domestic curtilage, because it isn't currently.
Just going back to the question that it is currently just a room.
Yes.
If a planning application came in, preempting it, but to make it into a dwelling, to make it into a dwelling, that would open up a whole can of worms, wouldn't it, for
Yes.
us?
Yes, it would. So yes, in the second appeal, which was also allowed by the inspector, so we recommended refusal, was for the Willow Tree Farm at Sanford Courtney. It's a householder application to renovate and extend a bungalow into a two-storey chalet bungalow, connect the garage to the dwelling with a material change to the dwelling to better situate its landscape and context. We refused the application on the basis that the addition, which was going upwards, which is quite unusual with extensions, so it was taking the roof off effectively and increasing the height of it. I'll just show you the site. So the top image is the existing bungalow, and the bottom image is the proposal that was refused by officers. But the inspector felt that that it wasn't incongruous, it wasn't very visible, and that there was sufficient landscaping around it to suggest that it's acceptable. So again, in both these cases, I think it was almost as if you could have gone either way on them, and we recommended refusal in both cases, and in both cases the inspector disagreed. It was the same inspector, in fact. But yes, I think we, as in terms of lessons learned for the officers, we need to make sure we're very clear about the reasons why we refuse applications. But equally, when I saw this application, I thought, oh my goodness. But the inspector has taken a slightly different view to us. So it happens. That's it. Thank you.
Other questions move on to undetermined major applications. By exception, I see the Wool Grading Centre still haunts us. Yes. As the long-serving undetermined major, although it does look as though there might be something moving there.
So the meeting was held with the local ward members and the case officer and myself and Caroline, I think you were there. Yeah. We talked about the difficulties with the application. One of the ward members offered to go back and speak to the applicant about that, but I haven't heard what the update is since that time. But it's on my radar to chase up with the case officer this week.
Burning a hole in the screen on the radar for so long. But anyway, we move on. Any other? I had only one. 1203. Planning application. And I was drawn. Sorry, it's the last but one on the sheet in front of us. Application advised to withdraw or accept determination as submitted. I mean, the words say probably everything there. Do we know which of the two he's going to choose?
He has written to the applicants offering them the opportunity to withdraw. As far as I know, at this stage, they don't want to withdraw. If they don't want to withdraw, then they will be, the officer will be recommending refusal. Because it's not, there's so much wrong with it. It's very, very, very dense, and it's almost as if they've considered it in a 2D sense without acknowledging that it's on quite a steep slope. So you can imagine the properties marching down the hill, and so and also there's not enough employment land. So, yeah.
Okay. Any others on undetermined majors? No? Okay. Have a special treat for you. We do have a special